Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be a little different from the previous ones because it isn't time-lapse painting and isn't really related to painting at all. Today I will be showing you a presentation I did in November 2017 at Nerd Night Tokyo. If you don't know Nerd Night, it's a monthly event in which 3 people present their research or projects to a room full of scientists and just pretty much smart people in general. They were kind enough to invite me to present my research, which, as some of you may know, is about designing prosthetic limbs. I talked about my research and a bit of what is going on around the world regarding prosthetic limbs, so I won't take too long in this introduction that I'm doing now. You will see that I was very nervous right before going up on stage. So there's like a couple of things that I misspoke or forgot to mention, unfortunately, but I do settle down a little after a while and feel more at ease, and so it's easier to speak. I'm not such a great public speaker, as you may imagine. And also, if you want to see the other presentations, go check out Nerd Night's channel. I have linked it down below in the description section. So they have all the videos of their presentations there, and they do live streams of the event. So even if you can't actually attend, you can always watch it online, and you can also follow it on Twitter because they live tweet it as well. It's very interesting, like all the presentations are super interesting, so it's really worth it to watch if you guys want to, because honestly I always feel just a little bit smarter after seeing the presentations. So yeah, without further ado, let's get on with my presentation. I hope you guys enjoy it, and don't forget to leave your thoughts down in the comment section. Thank you.
All right, one more of 3 speakers. This is the second one. I can't count. I want to finish this introduction. I want to continue my bottle of wine. Rafaela Libano is from Brazil. She is doing research at the University of Tokyo's Design Lab. She is also an illustrator, which is pretty cool, and a karaoke addict, which I can't comprehend, but that's fine. Rafaela will be talking about tonight the history of prosthetic limb design, with a focus on her own research in a design engineering lab working alongside a prosthetic center. You can find her on Twitter at GOOMY Design. Goomy Designs, I how I pronounce that? Yes. All right, go for it. Go for it. Yeah, good. That's it.
Okay, so good evening and welcome to the most clickbait presentation of the day. I don't actually make sidebars, so I'll just get that out of the way. So, is this on? That? Okay, so, like you said, I'm Rafaela Libano. I am also known as Gumi. Sometimes it's hard to say Rafaela. And I'm from Brazil. I did university in Rio for product design, and I also do some illustrations on the side. And I was working in the National Institute of Technology inside the Industrial Design Lab in Rio, and I worked a lot with like 3D printers and rapid prototyping. And up until the moment where I got a scholarship to come here to Japan and focus on prosthetic limbs in the design engineering lab in the University of Tokyo. And like you said, you can find me on like social media as Gumi Design. So how did I enter the prosthetics world? Oh yeah, I forgot that I'm extremely nervous, so I wrote everything down. Alright, so going back, just saying a little bit about myself. This presentation is basically focused on my project. So as a kid, I always wanted to be actually a doctor rather than a designer, and I had like this little side of me that I was always like trying to save the world, you know, trying to make a difference and everything. And once I became a designer, that side was like, okay, you're making cool stuff, but how do you save the world? So I was very confused about what to do until I came to Japan the first time, and I had like 1 year of exchange in Osaka, and I did 6 months of ceramics. And with that, I noticed I liked sculpting, and when I went back, I had a whole sculpting. This is relevant, okay? I swear. So like the whole interest in sculpting and stuff started getting me interested in special effects makeup for movies and stuff. So I wanted to be that person who made Michael Jackson turn into the Thriller's zombie. But then I still had the little ones like, yes, how's it even roll? So at one point I found out through Tumblr, I saw a post on Tumblr showing Sophie's work, Sophie Jodie Veda's work. And who is Sophie? Come on, man. Okay, this is Sophie. So with Sophie's work, I noticed her name is Sophie Jodie Veda. She's a London-based prosthetist. And like at the back, you can see that image that just popped up. What doesn't work when I'm not pointing it?
Are you pushing the laser button?
No. Okay. So can you go? Yes, you can go to the next one. No problem. Back again. Yeah, that. So this was the prosthesis I saw on Tumblr. And when I saw this, I noticed that it doesn't look like a leg. You know, it has a shape, it has a volume, but it looks like a porcelain cup or something. It has like a different color to a regular leg. And I really noticed that you don't usually see this around. Like if you're walking on the street and you see someone with like a prosthetic limb, you never see it like this. You know, something that they're actually showing. And that made me notice that there's like a lack of design inside the prosthetic limbs. So most of them try to imitate the residual limb. They try to imitate what a leg or an arm would look like. And they never get it. You know, whenever you see a prosthetic limb, it's really hard to find one that actually looks like a limb and doesn't fall in the uncanny valley. You know, it always kind of looks a little off. But then there's stuff like what Sophie does. She makes these limbs that are not meant to look like part of the body. They're meant to be like exposed. They're meant to be shown to other people. And at the same time, she also makes really realistic limbs. Like for example, these over here, or like these made out of silicone. They're all very real looking, and it's also extremely amazing that she can make something like this and also make, like at the back, there's an arm that has like a snake going right through it, you know? So I got a lot of inspiration from her, and then I decided to check out Hugh Herr. I saw a presentation on his TED Talk. He is MIT Media Lab, if I'm not mistaken, professor. That was me. And he lost both of his limbs, both of his legs, during climate accidents back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And now he's one of the leading, what, prosthetists? No, leading researchers, sorry, in about like bioengineered limbs. So he's created these limbs at MIT, which are, you can run with them, you can jump with them, you can dance. They're connected to the muscles. So they're very high-tech and very impressive limbs. So together with him, there's another person who inspired me a lot. Yes, Victoria Modesta. I think some of you may know her. Her prosthetic limbs are made by Sophie, and she has a video called Prototype. It's a music video which she uses the needle leg, which is really cool. If you guys want to check it out afterwards, I recommend it. And she is a performing artist who does not hide her limb. She has very different prosthetic limbs, and she shows them. She wants people to know that she has them because she's an advocate of people with disabilities. And she said, she mentioned once, or many times actually, that when you see a disabled person, a person without a limb on media, they're usually an athlete, because what media likes to show are people overcoming their disabilities. So they don't show people like artists who have disabilities, because that's not going to get the people going. People don't care if they have a disability and they do something that's not overcoming it. So they always look for heroes, for inspiring stories. But people with disabilities are people. They can do whatever we do. So we don't have to just focus on the athletes. And that's something I really like about her, and that's something that really inspired me. So, regarding the last point, I had a phrase that Hugh Herr mentions in his TED Talk is here. The human being can never be broken. Technology is broken. Technology is inadequate. And along with what she mentioned, people with disabilities aren't just there to inspire you. This is something that really, got to me, because it's true. Like, if you don't have a limb, it doesn't mean you are less of a person. It's not your fault if things are hard for you to do if you don't have a limb. If you use a wheelchair and you can't get to a restaurant because it has stairs, it's not your fault. It's the architect, the engineer, whoever owns that place should have a ramp, should have an elevator. It's not your fault. So technology is always evolving, and with it are prosthetic limbs. This is one of the fields that show that inventors and scientists are always evolving, and they're always creating better things. So prostheses, they've always been like attempts at masking a limb difference, and now they're becoming much cooler things that do even more than a regular limb would do. So this is the oldest prosthesis that we could find. It is from Egypt. It is a prosthetic toe from around 950 to 710 BC. And it was used by a noblewoman. And this is like the oldest evidence we have of a prosthetic limb. And the reason why one would have the prosthetic toe is basically because they used a lot of sandals and they needed to hold it with the toe. So she would just use that. And if you look at how it's just made out of like wood and leather, and there wasn't much evolution until the 16th century, which was ages later, until someone called, I'm sorry for all the francophones here, Ambroise Paré, a doctor in the 16th century, who created a prosthetic leg that had a hinge, so it could like use the knee, and it also had a locking knee. And along with that, he also helped evolve the amputation surgeries to accommodate a prosthetic limb. So until the 16th century, you didn't see much of a change, and from then on, you started seeing the evolution of it. One of the most recent is this hand. This is a bionic hand. It is controlled by the mind, basically, because you put it on and it can move the fingers through your muscle receptors. So it can do very delicate movements, like holding a needle or picking up an egg without breaking it, but at the same time, it can also grab onto things. So it's much better than it used to be. Before, it was just a hand, just like a stiff hand, Barbie doll hand, and now you can actually move it. But I still to see a bionic hand that can do this symbol. They don't really separate like this. So there's still space for evolving here. But you see a lot of evolution in the robotics part. But one part that I noticed doesn't really have as much is the socket design. This is how a socket is made. It is very kind of like rudimentary in a way, because it's very like it's very crafty. You don't really have a lot of technology in it. And like the socket is basically the part that connects your limb to the prosthetic limb. So if you don't have the leg, it's something that goes through you. Like if you don't have the leg below the knee, it would accommodate on your thigh and hold the rest of the limb. So basically, to make a socket, you have to do a cast with plaster out of the limb of the person, and then fill it with plaster. And then after doing that, you have to like change some extra points in there before you like cover it in plastic, and then you cut out the plastic, and then you add the layers of like carbon fiber or fiberglass, and then you put it in a vacuum, you put a bag over it, you put resin in it, and then you cut it again, you put color. It's all very handmade. And we're talking about like a prosthetic limb here. So there should be a better way to make it other than just have to rely on the craftsmanship of the prosthetist. So, so this is what a prosthetic center looks like. To me, it's really cool. I love this because I love the whole messiness of it and, making a mess out of the place and using your hands for it. But at the same time, you need something that is more precise than, just like your hands all the time and depending on the feedback from the user. Because when you make something like this, you give it to the user, you make him walk, and you're like, does it hurt? Does it work for you? Is it uncomfortable? And sometimes the user doesn't say it hurts. Sometimes they think, no, I think it's okay. I think I can deal with this. And it's not. You need something that can do that for you without you needing the feedback. So we're starting to make the sockets with the 3D printers. This is a 3D printed socket that we made at the lab. This is for my project. It is a socket for a child. And the advantages of making it 3D printed is that you scan the limb, so you always have that original image. Because once you make the socket in the traditional ways, you destroy the plaster. So you always have that, and you can print it out as many times as you want. If it breaks, you can print another one out, and it's going to be exactly the same as the first one. And that's very important for making legs for children because they have a very high activity level and everything, and you have to make more limbs. So the thing about prostheses for children is that there's not as much advancement in the design of it. And I wanted to ask why you guys think that happens. So just very quick question. It's like, why do you think there's not as much advancement in the technology of children? Yes.
Big voice.
They grow up.
Yes. Okay. Yes. We don't hear it.
They grow up fast.
Okay. So basically, they grow fast is one of the main reasons, and they outgrow their limbs very quickly. Usually you have to change your limbs like every year, maybe 2 years, but children do it at least twice a year, depending on their age and how much they're growing. So it gets really expensive to change limbs. There are some places that you can't use your insurance to pay for an additional leg. You can't use your insurance to pay for the first leg to begin with. Sometimes it is let you one leg for life, so you basically have to keep the same leg, and they only last for about 5 years at most. And it gets really expensive. Another reason is that children, they are proportionally stronger than adults. They run a lot more, they're much more active, so they will end up breaking the knee, for example. They will break the foot. They will need to have replacements all the time. So they need, they use, like I'll show here, I kind of skipped it. They use parts adapted from adult prosthesis. And those parts don't adapt to the child. Those parts are not strong enough proportionally to the child. And other reasons are also because there's less amputated children or with limb differences than adults. And they also, because they don't really know as much their life without a limb, or with a limb, I'm sorry, they adapt much better. So you can see a child without an arm will adapt much better than an adult who lost their arm afterwards. And also they find it more uncomfortable, and even like trying to put on a pair of shorts on a child, they start crying and screaming. Imagine trying to do that on a limb that is grabbing onto their own. They also just rather not have it sometimes. So I am currently working on a prosthetic limb for a child. He has a very unique residual limb. He has it curves to the side, so he can't put on the limb just like stepping on it. So we have to create a different way of building his limb. And he's around 8 years old or so he's growing fast. So we are making a limb, a prosthetic limb that can grow along with him in a way. We scanned his leg and we started making the 3D printed socket for him. Basically, we're using a modeling software to do the limb around his scan. And we are creating a socket that can be adapted so he can use it as he grows. And this is a prototype of the socket we printed, which is basically just to check out the proportion and the size. It is a running prosthesis, so it has a blade rather than a foot. But this blade is just for, as a prototype itself, the blade it would be carbon just like already made. And the thing about this socket is that it has a BOA system, which is basically a lot of shoes also have that. You turn the dial, not this dial, you turn the dial and you can like loosen it or press it more. It depends on what direction you turn it. And this dial is being used in some other sockets already for everyday use for adults. Because they also, one thing you don't really notice when you have a whole limb is that it changes in size during the day. And especially residual limbs, they can swell or get thinner throughout the day, and then the socket feels a little loose. So there's some that have this dial, so you can just press it and keep it on for longer. Okay, so this is another limb we're making at our lab. This is the dummy, is what it's called. They started the project a few years before I came here, but I also helped out at the end, which was before I started doing the children's limb. And it is also a running prosthetic. It also has a blade, a ready-made blade, and we did the socket. This socket is also 3D printed. It is painted on, which is why it looks much better than the other one. It has it's ready to be used, but it's still like at the final stages just to make sure it works. And I think it's being used by a para-athlete runner called Saki Takakura. She runs in the Paralympics, and soon we hope that she'll be able to compete with this one as well. And there's a little video showing the limb at work. So additive manufacture, if you guys don't know, is basically 3D printing. So the socket itself is 3D printed, like I mentioned, and it's been going through a lot of testing to see if it can be as strong as the resin or carbon fiber ones. This is a video we made at the end of last year when we found out that it was basically good enough to run in. So the good thing is that it didn't break. That is always a thing. And I love this scene because you can see how the spring of the blade, when she steps down on it, it goes much smaller. Because if you see the blade when she's just standing, one leg is higher than the other because of the spring load. And yeah, it's like kind of cool. That's my leg. And together with this Miami group, they are also making modeling software for prosthetists to be able to create the sockets on the computer specific for this, so they can evolve and make it much faster than handmade. Okay, so summing things up. Basically, you can have very high-tech limbs, but not as much for the sockets. There are a few companies that are working on making better sockets, but more focused on the limb itself. Children outgrow their limbs very quickly and they need new ones, and you can definitely have a laser gun as an arm. As you can see here, this is one of Sophie's works. This is a gadget arm. It has a lot of stuff, including a laser gun. And 3D technology is advancing at a fast pace, and it's going to, I feel like it's going to be used more and more in creating prosthetic limbs and eventually in creating the other parts. So you can print out a whole prosthetic limb at once. So yeah, this is where you can find me. I'm also like post illustration stuff there, so that's it. Thank you.
Very cool stuff. Question?
Sorry, that was really interesting. You said you were testing how strong the 3D print was in relation to having Recovery do it. How strong is it in comparison?
Well, the 3D printer we use uses nylon powder, so in a way it's more brittle than, just carbon fiber and resin. So it ends up being heavier than it is strong. So we have to try and make it a structure that is, light enough for it to be better than carbon fiber. But right now it's like strong enough as much as the carbon fiber, but it's heavier. So it in that sense, for resistance, it still doesn't have that much of an advantage. So which is why we keep testing more and start creating more things with the 3D printer to find out how we can make it have more of an advantage to the previous materials we use.
Okay, cool, thank you. I'm sorry, one more if I can. Sorry. In terms of the modeling, the shape of it, how do you overcome like when you put the lid on, the shape of your lid naturally changes because of the compression around it. Do you compensate for that? Rather than it being loose, the shape and there's nothing attached to it?
So like
It's when you put a limb on, the residual kind of shrinks a little bit with the force and it changes shape slightly. How do you compensate for that?
Yeah, so basically we work along with prosthetists, so they have the knowledge of like where they have to hold on to stronger. So on the limb we have to always avoid pressing too much on parts that are hard, like on the bone or under the knee or anything like that, and have more strength back like around the muscle, for example. So we always try to compensate where the strength should be on the limb, and you test it out afterwards with the user as well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I've met you before, but I just learned your real name. Nice to meet you. I have a very technical question. I've worked with 3D printers a little bit, and I think the bigger the object, the more risk you have to have failures. So how do you deal with that?
Well, we do a lot of testing first. Since we use the 3D printer for research, we have this space to test out a lot of things. So we try things like we print out maybe 4 sockets with only a slight difference in thickness or in length or in general, because like I said, there's always going to be some sort of compensation we have to give onto the print. Sometimes it prints out like a shorter version of what we wanted, while the other x-axis is still the same size. So because we use the printer for research, we have this ability to see what the limits of the printer are and just print more and more until we have enough research for it.
Thank you.
The next question's down in front.
Okay.
Hello. Actually, I'm more interested in apart from the passive part, but how about the processes for the child? Is that actuated? Is that like connected somehow with EMG or with something to the muscles or to the nerves of the child, and it is responding to the child movement or something like this?
So in my particular research, we don't have any type of actuation with the child. Like, we don't have like any connection with the muscle or anything else. It's just like the printed socket that holds onto him with pressure. But like if you look at the work of the people at the Johns Hopkins Physics Lab or at MIT, right? They have a lot of like they make the socket itself have like loose connections with the muscles, so they can move like the toes or the fingers and everything. But in my research particularly, we don't work with that. We work more in the design aspect of it.
Hi. Just a question. I don't know if you actually know it, but you said that you do lots of testing. And just regarding the runner who is running for the Paralympics, do you know if with other limbs or with other like Tesla's just small changes, she's actually able to run faster? Or are there any like specifications how a limb should be to like be a limb and not to be like a running like
an extra device.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
And like ever since like Oppo started like use Blade, everybody had like this question, but aren't blades giving him an advantage over other people because they give him like a sort of spring forwards, right? He doesn't just run; he kind of leaps. And from what I've heard from like amputees who use springs, they say that it doesn't really give you that much of an advantage, like for them, because it kind of feels like you go a little forward, but like you still, if you have one healthy limb, for example, they still have like the muscle power on the other side, and it's a very different way of walking. So you kind of have to learn how to use the blade before you can actually have some sort of an advantage over everybody else who's been using their own legs for like 30 years. You know, so I don't know until what point you can consider this to be an advantage or not, but there's definitely like some research going on at MIT that they are making like exoskeletons and stuff like that able-bodied people are using as well to help them be stronger and faster. So depending on the limb, then yes.
Now we're back here. Is this the last one or is there one more after?
Hey, that was awesome speech, and I have a question for you. Previously, we had a session about the AI and deep learning. So, I would like to get some kind of comment from the designer perspective for the combination of the AI and such kind of the process. So, yeah, do you have any comment to the future of the combination of AI and these kind of things?
Well, there's still a lot to be done for the limb to be able to react the same way a regular limb would, because like I mentioned, the Johns Hopkins Laboratory, they're using a lot these connections to the muscle, and there's also a lot of work being done together with the doctors in order to you do the amputation itself whenever it's needed, already thinking about the future limb that they might wear. So there's this orthopedic doctor who is working with the Johns Hopkins lab who had to amputate a woman's arm, and he left the nerves for the fingers on her arm. So whenever she moves the muscle here, she can control which finger she's moving in the prosthetic arm. So you can use both of those technologies together. You can use both the doctor and the prosthetist together to create some sort of like hybrid connection between the amputation and the limb. And as for the evolution of the intelligence, as a designer, I don't really know as well how those things work, but just there's a type of software. It's not exactly a software, but it's like a surgery in which you do I forgot what it's called, osseo something or other, which you connect the what's it called, the metal tube straight into the bone, so you don't have to wear sockets. You already have kind of like what you do when you have a prosthetic tooth. You have the implant. Thank you. The implant directly onto your body, so you just connect the limb to it. So they are starting to create more implants like this, so you don't actually have to think about the way you move your leg. I mean, technically you do exactly that. You only think about it and it just walks, rather than you have to move it yourself. So I'm not sure if I answered your question properly, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of work being done to make the limb and the body communicate more easily between each other.
Awesome. And I think if you have more questions, you can come and ask Rafaela during the break. Let's give her another round of applause.